Bulls and Bears this week. Gary B. Smith, Jonas Max Ferris, John Layfield, along with Sasha Burns and Gary Kaltbaum. Welcome to everybody. Gary K., to you first. You say the piling on businesses is bad for jobs.
Yeah, look, the bashing by itself is not going to kill jobs, but it's the asinine policies. It's the asinine policy of $15 minimum wage, which sucks capital out of businesses without any added productivity. It's the asinine policy of a $1 trillion tax hike, and it's an asinine policy of socialism, which, by the way, only lives and breathes because of the dollars out of the capitalism. And by the way, when socialism gets too big and overtakes capitalism, you end up being a Venezuela, and when you lose capitalism, you end up being Cuba. So let's go vote for Bernie and Hillary.
John Layfield, the bashing is being done by people who are running for the highest office in the land. How does that not hurt businesses?
Well, I think it does, and what it does specifically, it hurts around the uncertainty that businesses have right now. You see M&A is not going forward. You're seeing investment is not going forward. Look, if we really had right now in our country a full job market like they say we do, and we might, it's just, but the reason that I wonder about it is because GDP is still abysmal right now, and if the unemployment rate is really around 5%, the reason that it's so low is because the jobs out there are not good-paying jobs. Our middle class has been destroyed. And all this political rhetoric that's coming out of Sanders and Clinton, who's moving to the left to try to get through the primary, is feeding off of this demagoguery that people are feeling out there of populism, and it is hurting business.
And Gary B., that's the point, is that these are policies that could likely get pushed if one of these people gets elected. How does that not crush job creation?
Well, it has to, dig. And look, this is basically, it always comes down to these unions basically want higher wages, and they're willing to go out and protest. And it turns out that the Bernie Sanders or the Hillary Clintons of the world use that as an opportunity to bash what they call big business. Well, what has it gotten the unions so far? In fact, what has it gotten America so far? I'd ask anyone on the left to say what unionized business has really prospered, because I can come up with quite a few where it's absolutely destroyed the business, going back to the automakers, to the steel makers, to textiles, to airlines. That's what happens. Look, if you're out there, we need to earn, 50% more than we are now. At some point, companies just say, look, we can't afford to do that, and we'll outsource jobs overseas, or we'll go out of business like a Bethlehem Steel, for example. And it just ends up hurting the very people who want the jobs and want the higher pay.
And Sasha, that's what's happened. After the UAW contract that Ford signed, what did it announce? That it's opening a plant, building a plant in Mexico with 2,800 new jobs, because it makes more economic sense.
Right, but that's not about minimum wage, and that's happening completely aside of the question, because you can use workers that are even below minimum wage. I mean, at the end of the day, minimum wage doesn't keep up with inflation. The idea that businesses are going to be destroyed by raising it, now $15 is a bit of a leap, but by raising it from $7.25, which is the basis, a lot of companies already pay more than that. So, the idea that people should work but not make enough to live off of is just wrong.
But $15, Jonas Max Ferris, you have said this yourself. Economists on the right and the left think $15. You have no idea what the impact would be with such a dramatic increase on job creation.
No, it's never been done. Nationally, cities can handle it that are wealthy cities, relatively speaking, but you start throwing that around in smaller parts of America where the average income is a lot lower, it's going to have much different effects than like in a Seattle or San Francisco. It doesn't keep up with inflation, Sasha, because Democrats really haven't addressed this issue when they had control. There's been ample opportunities through history to index this to inflation, but it becomes a very favorable political tool to use in an election to say that you're for raising it, when it would raise itself if it was dealt with, just like Social Security raises itself. We don't have arguments about raising that every year when it's election years. But getting back to the issue, it hasn't hurt business much, partially because it's in cities right now that can afford it, and it hasn't been done federally, and there hasn't been a lot of regulations yet. And more importantly, all this talk and outrage hasn't led to consumer behavior change. If people really cared about this, they would change their behavior and not look at them. They would not go to McDonald's, right? Has that happened? Have people left Verizon account? They closed their phones and moved to Sprint over this? I don't think that's going on in any number that would have impacted the business.
Go ahead.
Dagan, every one of these policies is about taking capital out of the business's hands and placing it somewhere else, namely into governments to dole it out. And I have news for you. You start mandating higher and higher costs without productivity gains. Aunt Mary and Uncle Bob that owns 3 restaurants and has 50 employees, and you tell them that they have $50,000 or more costs, I got news for you. The 50 employees is going to turn into 47, or they're going to get those robots that I was been reading about this week that cook 360 burgers in a matter of an hour. It is baked in the cake. It's exactly what's going to happen. Business owners will react when you mandate to them.
And John Layfield, these are businesses who've dealt with more than 7 years of the Obama administration, which ripped up health care, which ripped up the financial system with new regulations, has killed the coal industry, re-regulated the internet, and then has put on more regulations than President Bush and President Clinton in their 8 years in office.
Yeah, and remember, one of the best things Bill Clinton did was in 1996, the Fair Business Act, which took out a lot of the regulations of small businesses, and it really created a lot of job growth. We haven't seen anything like that since. We've just seen regulation stuck on regulation year after year after year, and Bernie Sanders has become the modern-day William Jennings Bryan, who, when he ran against McKinley for president, said anybody who makes $1 million had to do it illegal. You know, Bernie looks at these corporations, and I think he's very sincere with this, that somehow they're inherently bad, or people that have money have gotten it through ill gain, or they're bad because they have that money. And we don't do anything with the minimum wage because it's a political football. Just like Jonas said, Democrats don't want to deal with it long term, index it to inflation, because they use it for votes. Unions use it for recruiting. Republicans want to fight against it. They also use it for votes. We raise it to 15. What are we going to do in 15 years? We raise it to 25. There's no rationale for any of this going forward, except it's political.
Gary B., Fox News poll, the very latest, #1 issue for voters, boom, economy. More than double the percentage that terrorism got.
Yeah, well, and it should be, because, you know, as we've talked in the past, Dagan, you know, my personal opinion, and if you look at a number of indicators, the economy stinks despite what the Obama administration is talking about. I do want to address one point that Sasha made. She said, oh, this issue with Verizon isn't about minimum wage. In fact, I think she implied that a lot of this isn't about minimum wage. Okay, well, let's take that. You look at just in the Verizon case, and you just have to scratch your head. The workers that are going on strike there are making, with the pay and benefits package, $130,000 a year. They're in a declining business at Verizon that produces only 7% of their revenue. These people, by all accounts, versus the average American, have it pretty good, and yet they're out there with picket signs protesting. I mean, I scratch my head at how this is going to help them and how it's going to help the economy at large. They're going to be maybe, you know, protesting forever. Who knows if it gets resolved?
And Sasha, the Verizon CEO actually came out, Lowell McAdam, firing back at Bernie, and he said this, quote, I understand that rhetoric gets heated in a presidential campaign. I also get that big companies are an easy target for candidates looking for convenient villains for the economic distress felt by many of our citizens. But when rhetoric becomes disconnected from reality, we've crossed a dangerous line. We deserve better from people aspiring to be president, period. End of quote.
Well, look, I mean, Bernie Sanders is a socialist. So are any of us confused about this idea that he's going to say these things? No.
We're not confused, but we're worried because we worried about job creation.
Well, luckily he's not going to win, so it'll all be okay.
But I'll push back on that. He's pushing Hillary Clinton to the left. She's becoming, there's no daylight between those two lately.
But as we know, Hillary Clinton, she's very pragmatic, and she's not going with $15 an hour.
Look, you simply decide whether you line up with people that have never created a dime of wealth or a job, or all these great companies that have created trillions of dollars of wealth and millions of jobs. You know where my vote is. The problem is they are selling a scam to these people, that their lot in life is where it is because others are so successful. We should be applauding success and greatness, not ripping it and whining about it, like these two are doing on a daily basis.
That's going to be the final word. Thanks, guys. Cavuto on business.